We have one more presentation in this bracket before an afternoon tea break, my friends. So your next presentation is Recycling Solutions for Regional and Remote Communities, being presented by Aiden Anderson-Barr, Director of Ark Recycling. So if you wouldn't mind putting your hands together and welcoming Aiden to the front.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have the fortunate time slot just before afternoon tea on the last day, so I'll try and get everyone's attention. To help with that, I've brought some beers in at the back there, if you can see that there. That's definitely got everyone's attention now. There we go. Great. There's no need necessarily to rehash a lot of what we already know about the coag bans, the implications of waste and recycling management across Australia. We also know that even some of those materials that aren't necessarily covered by the export bans are being increasingly banned from importation from a lot of countries, particularly developing world, Southeast Asia, and in Africa. And while we were given reasonably advanced notice of these pending bans, we've still had a lot of buildup of materials. These are issues that we're all fundamentally aware of. There we go. So what we've seen is fundamentally metropolitan Australia mobilizing really, really quickly to try and solve these infrastructure problems. And unfortunately, like is often the case, regional and remote Australia, Northern Australia in particular, remains detached from those solutions and detached from those discussions. So we see these sorts of headlines all the time: 174 million boost for Western Australia, 162 million boost for New South Wales recycling infrastructure, but we are fundamentally falling behind and being left behind in the overall discussion of how we deal with waste and how we engage in meaningful resource recovery. And the most obvious issues that we've touched on is volumes, population density generating volumes, and distance. You know, you can see the density of population significant, obviously in the eastern states and down south, and the solutions thereafter are being catered for those areas, not specifically where we are here in Northern Australia. By way of example, now there is a large caveat. This information is pulled from the 2020 National Waste database, and I know this isn't necessarily inclusive of all waste materials. There's going to be issues with this, but it is still quite indicative in that you look at the Northern Territory, for example, you know, we're just around that 20% resource recovery rate. And again, we are more acutely affected by those issues across Northern Australia of distance and volumes or lack of scale of economy. But I would hazard a guess that places like Queensland and WA, if you took Perth and Brisbane out of the equation, would be very similar recycling rates or resource recovery rates as what we have in the Northern Territory, because they have consistent issues across the northern reaches of those jurisdictions. And fundamentally, the reason why we're here, we all know it, we can't afford to keep doing the same thing. Society, we know we need to avoid and divert from landfill. We know that councils shouldn't be perpetually having to subsidize and fund and hand out money to solve these issues in a never-ending increasing cost to the rateable base. It was mentioned before, we need community buy-in. Absolutely, we need people to understand the journey that we're on, and we need people to walk along that journey with us. And most importantly, Northern Australia can't be left behind in the crisis. We have to be walking along the same path and the same journey as the rest of Australia, and that's fundamental to the project that we're bringing forward here. So who are we? Who is Ark Recycling? We're a territory-based startup with our express purpose of rising above and beyond established industry conventions and bringing new innovation and fit-for-purpose models to Northern Australia, and particular in this case, the Northern Territory. The management team of Ark has lots of years across the critical recycling industries. Myself, I worked for many years in the United States in scrap metal recycling and then helped to establish a highly successful recycling technology startup. We have stewardship professionals, we have commodities trading professionals. And this project in particular, we've also established an advisory board to support the knowledge base and the intellectual capital. And that consists of environmental scientists, recycling experts, recycling technology experts from around the world, as well as specific experts from some of those waste producing industries. By way of example, key partnerships with people in the IT and asset management world from Melbourne and Sydney. This thing doesn't like me. There we go. So how are we going to address the issue? Well, fortunately, a lot of my contemporaries here have already said that we know what the issues are. We have volume, we have distance issues, and we have engagement issues. And so our model and our project is based purely around addressing those issues. So, you know, we work with a lot of stakeholders to really understand the root cause of the waste problems. And what we do is we're establishing an integrated mix of fit for purpose models to really solve those key issues that affect each individual area, because they're not all fundamentally the same. And we bring these together in a unified model, which is both sustainable socially, but economically. So the three solutions to those three key areas is we are investing in multi-stream, multi-purpose recycling equipment that maximizes the scales of economy. So by way of example, recycling in the midstream at its fundamental principle is size reduction and separation. That equipment is remarkably consistent across the various range of industries. And so by integrating different materials into singular processes as much as possible, you're able to drive up the amount of volume you can run through your equipment. Second, and Louise before me touched on it in a great explanatory way, is the hub and spoke logistics model, whereby you engage in distributive processing as and where it fits for specific areas within the overall region. And thirdly, and I would argue most importantly, is again, fit for purpose, community engagement and stewardship programs and models. So we'll be working with existing stewardship programs, as well as seeking to establish some new stewardship programs that actually work to solve the issues that we have, rather than the issues that they have in Sydney and in Melbourne. All of these solutions will be underpinned by our pilot facility, which we are going to put in Katherine in the Northern Territory. So the volume solution, as I touched on, a lot of this relates to size reduction and separation. You know, we all know that Northern Australia doesn't produce enough single stream waste volumes to justify the investments in some of the more specific larger equipment. However, if we increase the range of streams that we're running through the equipment, well, those are scales of economy then increase and improve, and the economic sustainability improves. And by way of example, I think we'll get to it in a moment, but by way of example, some of the materials we'll be looking to process will be tires and e-scrap. Now, the primary shredding of both tires, electronic scrap, non-ferrous scrap, ferrous scrap, can all be done by the same primary shredding equipment. So rather than having to invest in several different types of equipment, we maximize the overall capacity by reaching into as many different material streams as we possibly can. The logistics solution, again, as was mentioned previously by Louise, is a hub and spoke model. So that's a central processing downstream facility with that distributive processing around all of the approximately located spokes. And that can be based on the specific geographical, technical factors of each of those spokes. So some areas might want to integrate as much of their processing that they can, and that's absolutely fine. And we'll work very closely with those regions to do so. And some might want to outsource it completely, and we'll work very closely with them. There is significant remote industry in the Northern Territory, particularly around the Katherine area, and working with those remote industries to help establish some key freight and logistics route and some of these key spokes will then help us to underwrite the overall operational efficiency and freight and logistics efficiency to be able to service some of those proximately located communities. And that's going to be a really key factor to what we're trying to achieve here. And we've heard that today, that a lot of this has to be around the logistics and working with not only the logistics operators, but the consumers and the backhaulers and the people who are bringing freight backwards and forwards to find really innovative bespoke solutions to bring those, to put downward pressure on those logistics and freight costs. By way of example, this is, and these are purely indicative from a bespoke perspective, but if we look at Katherine, which is where we're going to be basing our facility, you see we have access to lots of different spokes, or we can provide lots of different spokes depending on the different areas. And importantly, this is an extremely resource-heavy area. Lots of oil and gas exploration, lots of mines, lots of agriculture. So there's ways that we can be really innovative in supporting these smaller communities and bringing a lot of the material to Catherine, what can't be handled at some of those smaller scales of economy. So the community solution, so connecting and engaging with community is really important. We all know that the Northern Territory, we all say it is a bit different. It is a bit different, but not in a bad way, in a very unique, culturally special way. And so one of the really key factors for us is not only working with policymakers and industry partners, but we also need to work with our contemporaries in Indigenous communities and really highlight that we have a deep respect for country, and we want to be able to help achieve some of those returns to positive values and respect for Indigenous areas and remote communities. Fundamentally, trust in the end of life processes, though, will help underpin the support that we get from regional and remote communities. If they believe the right thing is happening and they can see the right thing is happening, they will then contribute a lot more to the process. So while it's easy to say we are doing the right thing, we have to be seen to be doing the right thing and show that we're doing the right thing. And that makes it easier for them to do the right thing. Product stewardship, again, this is another one that I touched on earlier. We're going to be engaging and have already engaged with a range of stewardship programs from across Australia, helping them advance their agenda, but more specifically helping them advance their Northern Australian agenda, which is really critical, as we've seen today and heard lots of comments from it, that they seem to be falling short in the areas of supporting outside of metropolitan areas. We will be establishing some bespoke stewardship programs for the Northern Territory as well, really critical to making sure we get that better resource recovery rates across our region. So the scope of materials for our project, as I said, it will be multi-stream. Phase 1 is scrap metal, tires, electronic scrap, photovoltaics. Phase 2 would be more of the bulkier waste, MSW, C&D, C&I waste. Now, on e-scrap, one of the really important things to note is we don't produce enough e-scrap as a jurisdiction to make it overly economically viable to run any sort of e-scrap facility. And by way of that, a lot of it goes down south. We've established a agreement in principle for an asset management company in Sydney and Melbourne who works with lots of large companies and institutions, that they will bring and ship their material here for refurb and or recycle through us, because they see the need for benefiting Northern Australia and remote and regional areas. And so some of those freight questions that you might have around how you're able to achieve this are negated by the high value of some e-scrap materials that we're able to draw out of the southern states. And so a lot of these factors, particularly scrap metal, tires, and e-scrap, they have a moderately to extremely high value post-recycling, and that will then help to underwrite the value of the facility and improve the economics, allowing us to move into MSW, C&D, C&I, and ensure that we're not just putting this perpetual upward pressure on the rateable base to have to constantly underwrite the resource recovery initiatives. So why this model? As I mentioned, we're starting with the highest revenue streams as possible. The model engages a lot with jurisdictions locally, federally, territory, as well as community. And we feel this is the most integrative model to be able to get full stakeholder and community support to see that it's not only economically viable, but socially viable. And both of those don't have to be mutually exclusive ends. We can achieve this fairly consistently. And so working together, realistically, all we're looking for is establishing some of those key partnerships with councils, with industries, with stakeholders to understand the nature of the problem that you're all facing and how we can step in and help out with that. That's really important for us, is to understand what your problem is and how we can help you to solve it. And we will go above and beyond to do so. Just some parting words, and I've breezed through this pretty quickly. as I said, economic and environmental sustainability don't have to be mutually exclusive goals. They really don't. We all know that, but it's something that we need to get out there to community. You know, through innovation and partnerships, we'll build a fit for purpose model for the territory and for Northern Australia, and we'll get significantly better results in doing those fit for purpose models. And lastly, you know, traditional methods have been the problem. We, Ark, and all of us here can and will be a part of the solution. So I think that's it. Yeah, thank you all very much, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yes. Mid 2022, so mid-year 2022, with the necessary amount of slip included in that. So.
Gee, you were lucky. I just about took over and you wouldn't have got it back.
Professional. I know what's going on. Where are we at? Did anyone have questions? Were there any questions?
We had one, but I think
Had one. Any
good.
others?
Yeah. So I will be hanging around this afternoon. If you want to come up, have a chat, grab a card, and we can start to talk through some partnership collaboration options there. Great. Thank you.
Can we have a round of applause for Aiden, everybody?